let's be honest, the words Canadian income tax don't exactly scream fun, do they? They can feel, well, complicated, maybe even a little intimidating. But what if we flipped the script on that? What if we started thinking about it not as a chore, but as a really important piece of your own financial puzzle? So for the next few minutes, we're going to do just that. We're going to demystify the entire system.
So what if you could make tax season, less taxing? That's really the big idea here. We're going to pull back the curtain, take the confusion out of the equation, and turn this big, complex system into something you can actually understand and, more importantly, navigate with confidence. Here's the game plan. First, we'll kick things off with the big why, like what's the point of taxes anyway? Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how it all works, actually calculating your tax bill. From there, we'll look at the essential tools you have for lowering that bill, deductions and credits. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with some smart strategies for planning ahead. All right, let's dive right in. Section 1, why we even pay taxes. Before we get lost in the numbers, it really helps to understand the big picture behind the whole system. The Canadian tax system really has three main jobs. First and foremost, it raises money for all the public stuff we rely on. Think healthcare, roads, social programs. Second, it tries to redistribute income a bit, using what's called a progressive system where higher earners pay a bigger slice of their income. And third, it's used to provide incentives and disincentives, like giving you a tax break for saving in an RSSP or charging higher taxes on things like tobacco to, well, nudge us in certain directions. Okay, Section 2, calculating your tax bill. Now for the main event. Let's follow the journey of a single dollar from the moment you earn it just to see exactly how your tax gets calculated. The Canada Revenue Agency, or CRA, uses a pretty clear step-by-step formula. It all starts with your total income. That's everything you've earned. Then they subtract certain deductions to get your net income, and then a few more to find your taxable income. Now that is the magic number. That's the amount the tax rates get applied to. And finally, you subtract your tax credits to figure out what you actually owe. Okay, to make this really concrete, let's use an example. Meet Ralph. Let's say his taxable income for the year is exactly $75,000. So, how much federal tax does he owe? Well, it's not as simple as just multiplying that by a single percentage. And that's because Canada has what's called a progressive or marginal tax system. Your income gets split into different buckets or brackets, and each bucket gets taxed at a different rate. So for Ralph, the first chunk of his income, up to about $57,000, is taxed at the lowest federal rate, which is 15%. That part of his tax bill comes out to about $8,600. So what about the rest of his money? Well, the amount he earned above that first bucket falls into the next bracket up, and that gets taxed at a higher rate, 20.5%. So that remaining portion adds another $3,600 or so to his bill. And to get the grand total, you literally just add the tax from each of those brackets together. So for Ralph, his total federal tax liability, and this is before any credits are applied, is just over $12,000. See, when you break it down like that, it's not so scary. All right, Section 3, deductions versus credits. We've mentioned these a few times, and for good reason. They are the two main tools in your tax reduction toolkit. And honestly, understanding how they differ is an absolute game changer. Okay, here is the critical difference. A tax deduction lowers your taxable income, that magic number we talked about. Because of that, how much it's worth to you actually depends on your tax bracket. A tax credit, on the other hand, is way more direct. It just chops money right off your final tax bill, dollar for dollar. The big takeaway here is that deductions tend to benefit higher income earners more, while credits give the same dollar value benefit to everyone, which makes them a bit more fair. So what kind of things count as a deduction? Well, the most famous one is probably an RSSP contribution, but other common ones include things like childcare expenses, union dues, and even certain moving costs if you had to relocate for a new job. Each of these helps lower your taxable income before any tax gets calculated. And then on the credit side of the fence, you've got things that directly reduce the tax you owe. Everybody gets the basic personal amount credit. It's for, well, existing. But other common ones are for your CPP contributions, tuition fees, medical expenses, and any charitable donations you've made. All right, Section 4, Smart Tax Planning. We've got the theory down, we know how the system works. Now for the really good part. How can you use all this knowledge to your advantage? This is where tax planning comes in, and it's all about legally keeping more of your hard-earned money. Now, let's be super clear. Tax planning is not about finding shady loopholes or, tax evasion. Not at all. It's about legally and strategically using the existing rules to maximize your after-tax wealth. It's an absolutely essential part of any good financial plan.
When you really boil it down, personal tax planning often comes down to two big ideas. The first is income deferral. This is all about pushing income into a future year when you expect to be in a lower tax bracket, like when you retire. The second is income splitting, which is basically about shifting income to a spouse or partner who's in a lower tax bracket to lower your family's total tax bill. Here is a perfect real-world example of that income deferral strategy. Imagine you get a $5,000 bonus at work. Nice. If you take it as cash, it just gets added to your income and taxed at your highest rate. But, as this quote points out, if you put that entire gross amount directly into your RRSP, you get an equivalent deduction. The bonus basically vanishes from this year's taxable income, which means you pay less tax right now. Pretty smart, right?
And this brings us to what might be the most crucial point of this entire conversation. The goal isn't just to minimize your tax bill at all costs. That can sometimes lead you to make some pretty poor financial choices. The real focus of smart planning should be on maximizing your after-tax income and your overall net worth. It's not just about what you pay, it's about what you actually get to keep.
And that really brings us to the big takeaway. Your financial plan just isn't complete without a tax plan. They go hand in hand. So the question I want to leave you with is this. Now that you're armed with all this new understanding, what's your next move?